So here I'm doing a presentation on an introduction to the Rgyud Bum, or NGB for short. I'm a James Koo, PhD student at Fokwang University, and this was presented during the International Online PhD Students Conference in 2002, around COVID time. So, introduction. Tibetans have a passion for books, since books represent the embodiment of Buddha's voice, a medium of Buddhist written culture, and a symbol of the religion itself. Out of all the books in Tibet, the Kanjur and Tenjur have received much scholarly attention, while that the Rgyud Bum, hereafter referred to as NGB, have been relatively overlooked, and this is perhaps due to its difficulty in interpretation and analysis, and the NGB is still an integral part of Tibetan Buddhism. This paper seeks to answer 3 questions about the NGB. What causes its formation, the formation, structure, and classification of the Rgyud version, and the genealogy of the various NGB versions. Interesting, huh? So what made the NGB come to formation? So in the 11th century was a watershed moment in Tibet as Buddhism transmission returned after nearly 2 centuries, and the new translations made the old ones look less authentic. As new tantras, Nosarma, were coming in floods and gaining recognition, the authority of the old tantras, Nokningma, came into question. La Lama Yeshirgyoe, the king of Nari in the 11th century, saw many malpractices of Buddhism and issued an edict in about 985 and requesting everyone to refrain from tantric malpractice and encouraged young Tibetan monks to travel to northern India to find out whether their practice were genuine or not. They were especially concerned with the Jordro, the practice of sexual right and the right of deliverance or killing. Sex and killing, interesting. Which was practiced under the name of Dzogchen. The tantric practice seems to contradict everything the Vinaya taught. Later, Shibawe in 1092 rejected the tantras of the Nyingmas and their great perfection teachings as attributed to Indians but composed by Indian Tibetans. The polemics between Nyingma and Sarma continued until the end of 14th century. As a result formed the collection of the Kanjur and Tenjur by the Sarma and the Rgyud Bum by the Nyingmas. 2 systems of Buddhist canons in Tibet, Kanjur and Tenjur of the Figure Sarma and the NGB of the Nagi Sarma. So, how many of the Nyingma Tantras have been excluded from the Kanjur? Mainly because they lack exact Indian equivalent texts. New Nyingma Tantras continue to be revealed through treasured literature, making the canon in a sense unable to be closed. As a result, very few old Tantras were included in the original redaction of Kanjur. The NGB is a large corpus of tantric scriptures that has a special canonical status for the Nyingma school that is traditionally associated with the earliest transmission of Buddhism into Tibet during the Tibetan imperial period. So, the final organization of the NGB occurred during the Fidar, and its compilation may have been inspired by the exclusion of its text from the Kanjur. Boo-hoo. So, there are no sutras, Vinayas, or commentaries, only the higher tantras of the Nyingmas. Only out of the 1,000 Rgyud Bum texts, Only perhaps 3 have their own commentaries: Guyagarbha Tantra, Dogondu, and Gunye Gyarbo. Only the Guyagarbha Tantra still enjoys a living commentarial tradition up to this date. Why were the old tantras named the Rgyud Bum, 100,000 ancient tantras? According to the myth, there was an root tantra at the size of 10,000 stanzas that never materialized into some revealed by Vajrapani to King Indrabhuti. 100,000 comes to represent a large number of root tantras in the existence by Indian and Tibetan Buddhists, and the Rgyud Bum Mimapas continued this tradition. So let's go into the formation, structure, and classification of the Rgyud version. And Rgyud Bum is a collection of approximately 1,000 heterogeneous esoteric texts comprised of exclusively the tantric scriptures of the 3 inner tantras, Mahayoga, Agni Yoga, Ati Yoga, who claims to have been translated from the Indic language of the time of Padmasambhava. Many of the Sanskrit original of the Rgyud Bum have long been lost, but they represent the early traditions of Buddhism in Tibet, including the Dzogchen and other early Buddhist political thoughts, and thus represent the turbulent eras of the 8th to 10th century. So the Rgyud Bum is currently available in several editions, which differ in content and order. The original version is compiled in 42 volumes by 15th century rNying, but there is evidence of its existence in some form prior to the 12th century. Later, Jigme Lingpa and his disciple Getse Panchen Gyurme Chokdrup, under the patronage of Rgyud ruler, used rNyingpa's version as its basis, while also used Mindrolin manuscript and others as a comparison, underwent collation, editing, and cataloging, and eventually became the only xylograph in GB known as the Rgyud Bum. So, despite being excluded from the Kanjur, the old tantras were fervently supported and practiced by other schools, including the Sakya school of Dorje Purba deity, Galuk monastery of Sera and Rnyingpa, Da Jin Yang Sang deity, and several Dalai Lamas, including the 9th, 13th, and 14th. 5th, 13th, and 14th, The Rgyud Rgyud Bum edition was produced between 1794 and 1798 in Rgyud, Eastern Tibet, and was commissioned by the Queen of Rgyud, Tsewang Lamo. The carving of the woodblocks were supervised by Mahapandita Getse Panchen Gyurme Chokdrup, and also collated and edited the text. 7 famous Panditas comprehensively reviewed, reordered, and edited to make the formation edition. Famous edition of 414 texts in 26 volumes. The thorough redaction rendered in reading to be viewed as most consistent, coherent, and grammatically than other editions. This is widely perceived as the final and most authoritative version of the Rgyud Bum. Awesome. When the texts are classified according to their possible origin, they fall into 3 distinct categories: Indic, Hybrid, Indic Tibetan, and Tibetic. A corpus of ancient Tantra contains a small portion of translated Indian texts, and the majority are indigenous Tibetan compositions. Some other consists of a blend of Indic and Tibetic textual layers. Almoji analysis shed some light on the origin of the Tantra, but I was hoping for more in-depth analysis done on the Tantras with Indic Tibetic origin. for example, a concrete example. However, doesn't matter. We're going to genealogy of the various Rgyud Bum. The surviving Rgyud Bum is highly variable. The original Rgyud Bum has been long lost. The surviving copies differ from each other. That has caused the extant Rgyud Bum to be frequently unreadable during textual corruption that are mainly due to ice skip and to confusion of homophones. This has resulted in many Rgyud Bum to be substantially portions incomprehensible even to the most learned Tibetan lamas. The reason for the incomprehensibility of the Rgyud Bum can be attributed to its use of ancient Tibetan and also because it has not gone through thorough editing and standardization like the Kanjur and Tenjur. So currently there are 7 surviving Rgyud Bums. We're not going into the detail. Several collections represent several editions while some seem to be simple copies. In the past, there were probably hundreds of Rgyud Bum collections because every Nyingmapa monastery would have needed one. And that is a loss of 90% since the pre-1950s. The DVRC website currently provides scanned images of 3 Rgyud Bum texts, Rgyud, Tsamdrak, and Dingye. So here is a preliminary analysis of the 4 Tantra texts follow pattern. The following patterns have emerged. We're not going to go to the detail, you can read it on your own. The genealogy is determined by applying classical textual critical technique to the problem by editing individual texts. Since most NGB in Tibet have been destroyed, this genealogy will also be partial and incomplete, but nevertheless shed light in its future development. Conclusion. The Rgyud Bum is a collection of tantric scriptures that has been special canonicity status for the Nyingma school. That is a tradition associated with the earliest transmission of Buddhism into Tibet during the time of Tibetan imperial period. There are many versions of Rgyud Bum with multiple manuscripts versions and one xylograph version extended. The Dingye version is the only xylograph and is widely perceived as the most authoritative one. There are currently 7 Rgyud Bum surviving collections, and surely more will show up later. Even though Rgyud Bum has been downplayed by the Sarmapas as less authentic, it remains an essential link of the earliest Buddhist scripture in Tibet and thus should be studied in depth. That's all for today. Thank you, folks.